and SharePoint 2010's kind of new position within the world of enterprise content management and what it can do for you. As Meredith discussed, we experienced a couple of technical snags this morning, so unfortunately we're working with a slightly older revision of the deck, so I apologize we're a little light on some of the graphics and visuals that had gone in since this, but we'll talk through all the features and then hopefully have a chance to dive into some deeper conversations as appropriate during the Q&A time at the end. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit here about, and I apologize here, I'm looking to advance the slide deck. Here we go. Let's talk a little bit about what enterprise content management is and why it's important. So when we talk about enterprise content management, we're talking about a formalized system that we use to organize content across the enterprise, which includes documents that are created. It includes records pertinent to the organization. It also includes web content and web publishing. And what really distinguishes this from, say, a file server somewhere that has a bunch of documents and so forth piled into it is that it's closely integrated with organizational processes. So this means that it is closely tied into how documents are created in your enterprise or how they're received. It's also connected to how they're managed, which refers to their connection to human workflow and business process and how they're organized and visualized and conceptualized. It's closely tied to IT policies around governance, auditing, backup, recovery, maintenance, and is integrated with kind of the life cycle of organizational IT. And furthermore, that it's closely tied in with delivery mechanisms that support how your organization best uses the data and presents it to users. Previously, SharePoint had a story around a few of these components and did them decently. In 2010, it really has changed the game, and I'm kind of excited to get to talk a little bit today about how it's made some pretty remarkable breakthroughs in these areas. So really, this is a presentation about how to make information work more effectively in the business. And unfortunately, traditionally implementing ECM has had some problems associated with it. For those of you who have looked at enterprise content management platforms available today, there are a few problems that plague them. One is that they're very high cost, both to implement and to maintain, and the pricing models are outrageously complex, and in some cases we're talking 4- and 5-page pricing sheets and not exactly being able to determine what you need, and the costs associated are astronomical. In addition to that, the systems themselves institute a very high degree of complexity. So there's a lot of hardware often required, a lot of specialized software, a lot of specialized skills to maintain that either require an extensive amount of training in the organization or relying on consultants and vendors for all maintenance items. And in addition to that, you're often tied into their proprietary platform. The interfaces for getting information in and out are often very much specific to the platform and not easy to extend or work with. If you chose to migrate all your data outside of the ECM platform and somewhere else at a later date, this tends to be very, very difficult to do. And the net result here is that you end up with a system that is very difficult to implement, that leads to long project times, and due to just kind of the innate complexity and the degree of kind of proprietary design, it is very, very difficult to implement properly and on time, and then cost an organization a great deal to maintain over a lifetime. SharePoint hopefully is going to change this game a little bit. So here is a breakdown of what ECM systems cost to, oops, advance the slide farther than I had hoped, what the ECM systems on average cost to implement in their first year. Between hardware, software, and licensing, between two of the major players in the market, ECM's Documentum and OpenText, and by comparison, SharePoint. And there's two important takeaways here. One is that, of course, that SharePoint presents a tremendous value from a cost perspective compared to several of the large competitors in the ECM space. The second, though, is noticing how extremely well it scales. when in other pieces of software, when you look at the cost of expanding the user base across an enterprise, it quickly becomes prohibitive. So rollout becomes limited, or you end up with different enterprise content management systems and different document stores from department to department or team to team, because it's cost prohibitive to roll it out across the entire enterprise. SharePoint helped remove that barrier as well. So looking at the new to SharePoint 2010, there's a wealth of new features, as I mentioned, that we'll actually talk to around the ECM capabilities. The really impressive part here is that they've made these features truly accessible, and they've wrapped up all of these features within the standard client access licenses. So this is not a bank-breaking affair. And on top of which, they've made it just incredibly easy to, I don't know why we're jumping slides.
Huh?
There we are.
There you go. It's unified communication keeps cutting out.
I see. So the final thing that they did was make this very easy to work with. It is managed as part of SharePoint, your familiar SharePoint deployment that can already be leveraged for intranet and extranet capabilities, or maybe being used for a public website, is the same backbone for these ECM features. It's managed as part of the same piece. It's managed from the same console and the same interface by the same team of SharePoint administrators, so there's no additional overhead to maintain. In addition to that, content is as easy to load in and out as it ever has been with SharePoint in terms of easy-to-use web interfaces, files, Explorer-style access to document libraries. All your familiar tools that have always worked with SharePoint content can now be leveraged in an ECM setting. And finally, it's very tightly integrated with the suite of Office applications, so it interacts with the content generation tools in very predictable, understood ways that are familiar to users across the enterprise. So let's talk a little bit more about what these specific features are that are new to SharePoint 2010. And some of these are 2007 features that you may have seen before that have been enhanced, so we'll talk to those a little bit too and how they've changed. And the best way to talk through this is talking back to those 5 stages of the enterprise content management lifecycle. So starting with the capture phase, which deals with how content is created, and we're going to look at multiple kinds of content. We're going to look at documents that are circulated through the enterprise. We're going to look at records, so fundamentally documents that may or may not have been generated in the enterprise but they need to be held onto and archived. And the third piece is web content. So looking at the new suite of features in 2010, 2010 has introduced a couple that are really slick. One is there's a tight integration with a suite of Office web apps that are the full-featured or very close to full-featured Office applications run natively in the web browser, removing the need for a true essentially installed version of the Office client in many situations. It boosts compatibility and collaborative capabilities across platforms, Mac users, various versions of Windows, the traveling user who may not have access to the full suite of applications on his normal workstation, and natively hooks these up to SharePoint to be dumped in and the rest of the ECM capabilities leveraged. On top of this, there's a tagging ability that SharePoint does internally to documents and so forth that are generated by SharePoint, that it essentially inserts a smart ID, a GUID, into this document that can be used to track it. So when this document is taken offline, emailed 4 or 5 times, the title is changed, so forth and so on, when it comes back into SharePoint, SharePoint still knows now that that's the same document it was when it left. The third is a piece of the traditional publishing framework that was implemented in 2007 and has seen a facelift in 2010, but it's the ability to generate page layouts and a publishing framework that allows you to design a template for how your enterprise's web content should look with respect to branding and with respect to layout and with respect to content, and from there be able to easily allow users to type directly into the page and in a very what you see is what you get experience, develop web content that can then be published and managed through ECM tools. The next piece of the puzzle is talking about how we manage this content, and this has to do with, now we have content that's been generated or gotten into the system. Now what do we do with it? How do we tie it to business processes? So some of the key pieces in the management piece are collaboration, and this is one of the pieces where I think SharePoint truly shines. SharePoint has, for several versions now, been a very strong collaboration platform, allowing teams and allowing departments to work and collaborate on common sets of documents, announcements, events, and so forth, and really have a real-time environment where people can share knowledge. This is a huge strength of using SharePoint as an ECM platform, as opposed to many of the competitors don't have a native collaborative capability, and in fact still have to turn to SharePoint and lean on SharePoint to provide the collaborative capabilities for their own ECM products. So really in the SharePoint world, this is a very closely tied, very core part of the experience that I think adds a lot of value to the platform. The second, when we talk about process, is workflow, and here again the story has changed tremendously in 2010 for the better. In 2010, workflow is divided up into 3 real tiers. They've instituted a new, very simple level of workflow where business analysts can now actually use Visio 2010 to author workflow directly as a part of, I think we just ended up back at the video, to actually author workflows directly in Visio 2010 as part of their native tool set, using stencils in Visio 2010 to construct workflows that SharePoint can actually understand and execute. This is a key for essentially removing IT and developers farther from having to be directly involved in all workflow creation and development, and really simplifying the tool set. These workflows can be imported to SharePoint Designer and the other way around as well. And SharePoint Designer, again, has seen an overhaul in 2010 and presents a much, much stronger suite of workflow tools than were present in 2007. Including the ability to work with the out-of-box workflows and modify them so that you can essentially tweak out-of-the-box workflows rather than to build from the ground up. And then finally, the Visual Studio option remains for a line of business workflows and critical applications that have very customized, very finely tailored requirements that don't fit within the capabilities of the others. Again, it's still possible to build these workflows in Visual Studio with the sky's the limit, presenting a very strong paradigm for doing a lot of core processing around ECM content, whether that's documents or whether that's web-based. And the ability to attach workflow to the whole breadth of this content, from web pages to Excel spreadsheets to scanned documents, is a real strength of the platform. The next key piece about ECM is when we talk about storage. We need to think about where documents go, and this is where SharePoint shines from having a SQL-based backend. There are a number of content management applications out there, be it web content management applications or document repositories, that unfortunately are still using a model of stuffing documents on a file system in an invisible file share somewhere, and pretending that that's an effective strategy for essentially governance and maintenance and backup and recovery. SharePoint has moved all of its content into the SQL database as of at least 2007, but certainly 2010. And the upshot of this is that all of your content is centrally managed in a scalable, in a very scalable environment where Clusters SQL can have additional servers spun up and additional space allocated. It can be very closely monitored and governed. It's very easy to add additional capacity and very easy to add additional performance. And in addition to that, it's very easy to use built-in tools that IT administrators are familiar with to schedule sound backup and recovery plans to make sure that regular backups are taken, to include these backups with other core business systems that have, say, for example, offsite tape backups of their SQL databases taken, and really treat this as part of the whole without adding a new layer of management to make sure that the data is well stored and is secure. In addition to this, with the database, one of the perks that comes with this, one of the advantages that comes with this is that SharePoint has an extremely strong support for versioning, and a versioning tool that's built in that allows a full track of changes to these documents as one would expect from enterprise-level content management. The ability to walk backwards through documents or images or whatever else and see a full history of who changed things, when, and what they changed, all the way back to a document's inception. A third piece here that unfortunately is one of the bullet points eaten in this morning's technical difficulties is that there's really, SharePoint has always supported a degree of metadata in the documents. However, the ability and these capabilities of the metadata tagging have really been blown out in 2010 and really are better suited to this new kind of enterprise content management paradigm, including the ability to work with term sets in a term store and generate essentially a taxonomy of terms to be able to create, for example, an organizational hierarchy from a whole company to divisions to departments, or alternatively for IT in a knowledge base to create a taxonomy that starts with all IT and then breaks out into hardware and software, and then from there into server applications and client applications, so forth, and develop these taxonomies of terms that are centrally managed and centrally administered, and then to be able to tag all of this content off of these terms. And there's a rich set of tools around managing these terms and a set of abilities there around creating terms, deprecating terms without deleting them, creating a hierarchical term store, and using this to really tag content in new, more intelligent ways than had been available previously. So once we have our content stored, the next piece we have to think about is how we preserve it. What is our strategy around making sure our content survives in the long term? Again, SQL is a key player here because this makes it an easy part of a backup and recovery strategy that we can take full SQL database backups, stick them on indestructible media, and lock them in a vault somewhere and know that they're going to remain valid and intact. It makes this very simple to look at archival strategies without the need of additional expensive tools or procedures that aren't already being taken. The additional key piece, and from a feature standpoint that SharePoint 2010 has brought to play, is a very robust set of records management tools that are geared around retention policies where there can be events in a document's life cycle, be it creation date plus 1 year, creation date plus 3 years, and we can set activities to occur specifically on these dates to comply with retention requirements. So we can have requirements that say 1 year after a date of documents creation, eliminate all prior versions. 3 years after the date of documents creation, remove it from the SharePoint site and move it to an enterprise content store, to a particular archive where old content goes to rest, and be able to build these kind of rich policies that are entirely governed by the system and automated by the system without intervention, essentially plugging a gap from previous versions of SharePoint to allow it to play this kind of role where the life cycle of a document beyond its immediate use and beyond its end of life is important. We need to think about how long a document lives and where it lives for its duration, how long we need to hold on to pieces of information, and where they should live during that time frame. And SharePoint 2010 has really risen to the challenge in this area as well. The final and arguably one of the most important pieces of enterprise content management is about delivery. It's about how we get information back to the user. And this is one of these areas where sorry, we jumped back a few slides again, where SharePoint again really shines against most of its competition. First of all, SharePoint presents some very, very powerful search capabilities that have again been improved in 2010 over 2007, with a slick range of search tools from the most basic package all the way up through the new fast search capabilities presented in the top end SKU. These search capabilities are very rich. They present an ability to crawl document content as well as document metadata. They now include a new search refinement, a faceted search capability where you can now drill through your search results and get a set of search results and then filter them down by creation date or filter them down by the document's creator and continue to refine your results in real time. In addition to this, to work with the web content aspect of enterprise content management, there's the rich publishing framework that has been carried over and enhanced from 2007 that allows these page layouts and this real-time edited, WYSIWYG edited content to be published on a schedule to a public web server, to a public internet-facing SharePoint deployment with anonymous access capabilities, and deploy this content in a read-only mode on a specified schedule, as well as being able to specify retraction schedules if, for example, a piece of content is going to become obsolete or is a notice only relevant for a period of a sale or a particular government required notice that needs to go out, or whatever the case may be. We can actually specify policies around not only when content goes out, but when it comes back in. Additionally, SharePoint in its model has always instituted a range of web parts that allow you to display content to users in very practical, easy to set up ways. The content query web part from 2007 has been brought back and allows you to do some very creative, very powerful querying for whatever kind of data you want across the enterprise. The XLV web part, the XSLT list view web part, is a new addition to the family. It replaces the classic list views you had in SharePoint. We've jumped content again here. Let's see here. It allows us to essentially obsolesce the old list views with a much more powerful tool that is that out of the box comes default provision to look and feel just like your list views, but has a much stronger range of personalization and customization capabilities. And what's really key about both of these tools is that they both rely entirely on some XSLT to generate their look and their feel and their capabilities. So with a moderate amount of XSLT experience, a person can make radical changes to the appearance and capabilities of these web parts while still using the same underlying data without having to reinvent the wheel or develop a new component for yourself. You really have a phenomenal degree of control and flexibility with these web parts. Additionally, the RSS and alerting features have been brought back, and where this is really key and not necessarily met by all of the ECM competitors is many delivery mechanisms are a go fetch it when you need it kind of metaphor. It's a go navigate to this website or open up this client application or use this search tool, but it's always a I need to go look for information. The RSS and alerting features in SharePoint are particularly powerful because they reverse that paradigm and they present a model for pushing information. They allow a user to specify that these terms, for example, sales northwest, are relevant to me, and to do a search on these terms, and then to subscribe to alerts and get automatic information based on whenever what the results of this search would have changed, when a new document that would have matched these criteria exists in the system. Or additionally, pick a particular document that's relevant to me or a project I'm engaged with, and to be able to subscribe for alerts there as well, and to not only have information about version history and about when documents are changed available on the site, but to actually have that data pushed to me whenever it's available. So this ability to kind of opt into the pushing of data is a really core feature that's powerful and often overlooked, and unfortunately not all the ECM solutions out there present. And finally is when we need to talk about getting this information presented in maybe a paradigm that isn't SharePoint. And I think SharePoint really presents an exceptional scenario here compared to most ECM competitors, wherein SharePoint data isn't just tied to SharePoint, but there's a wealth of web services and an extremely powerful object model, an extremely powerful API that are presented to the SharePoint owner as part of their toolkit. So we can author content in SharePoint, we can manage content in SharePoint, but we can still expose this data to other line of business systems, whether that is presenting links to documents in a CRM application, or whether that's presenting automatically generated dynamic links to SharePoint web content to a separate web system, perhaps an alternate public-facing website that isn't SharePoint hosted, and the ability to dynamically retrieve this data from SharePoint and to integrate tightly with it from other systems is a fantastic boon. It means that there's no need to look at moving away from other core line of business systems and instead being able to integrate them tightly with the ECM platform without jumping through hoops or without needing extremely specialized consulting talent to make it happen. So those are some of the big new features that SharePoint 2010 has brought to the table in terms of ECM. We've talked about how SharePoint 2010 presents a rich story around capturing content from users and from other sources, how it presents a wealth of tools for managing this content and associating it with business process and using it to drive business process, how we store the data and then how we preserve that data once it's stored, and then finally how we deliver that content back to users. And ultimately this leads to huge benefits in the cost compared to traditional ECM, a shorter implementation timeline using well understood, simpler technologies, and a huge benefit to supportability in not only having the backing of Microsoft, but having a much broader support base, a much broader community with knowledge in the product area, and increased internal knowledge within the organization already present, both specific to SharePoint and gleaned from working with other Microsoft and Office products. At this point, I think we're going to open the floor for some questions.
All right, thank you, William. We did have a question come through. Again, just a reminder, to ask a question, please click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. We had someone ask to expand on search, and we also had another comment. One company tried to implement the new fast search, and they were not able to get alerts. So we had two things on search for you.
All right. So the first, to expand on search a little bit. Let's see here. And I'm sorry, Meredith, I missed half of that question as I was getting into the QA section. So we had two search-related questions. One was about the coupling of fast and alerts, and the other was?
Just to go into more detail.
Gotcha. I can certainly go into more detail. Fast plus alerts, I think, is actually a very good question, and something I think we should circle back to. I'm not sure I have a good technical answer for that available right this moment, without getting a little bit deeper into it and maybe presenting a little bit richer of a scenario there. But I can certainly expand on search a little bit. When we're talking about the search capabilities, search is presented in a few different tiers, dealing with the SharePoint search that's presented as part of the base package, as well as the fast search that was briefly mentioned. And when we talk about SharePoint search, it includes a native ability to crawl the wealth of SharePoint content, web pages, documents, etc., as well as the ability to tie this to external content, to have it crawl file systems, or to crawl external databases, or to crawl other content across the enterprise. And one of the great features around this that it brings to the table is also intelligent security trimming around this, which is to say, if I have documents that perhaps only my HR team should see in SharePoint, search is aware of that. So if an HR person enters a search query, they may see those documents, whereas anyone else enters the same query, they will not. So documents are actually targeted, and all search results are targeted to the people that should have permissions to see them. Again, as mentioned, these search results are refinable and can be drilled through, as well as can be subscribed to for alerts, though, as was surfaced, there are some questions here, and open questions around how to pair the fast search in particular with the alerting capabilities. Were there other specifics around search that I can go talk a little more to?
Yes, another question. Are they using Bing technology for search?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that the Bing name appears on it, but I do know that there was significant collaboration between teams in kind of designing and implementing the search. So I'm not sure it's necessarily the same product per se, but I know there's a lot of the same design under the hood.
Thanks, William. Another question we had was, how reliant is SharePoint 2010 functionality on Office 2010? As opposed to Office 2007?
That's a great question, and the answer is a little bit, but not much. You can use SharePoint 2010 with Office 2007 and get the 95% of your range of features and capabilities, including those around ECM. There are a few minor things that either are not quite as convenient, they aren't one-click available, or they don't work as well. For example, when we talked about Visio Workflow, that is a 2010 only feature. You cannot use Visio 2007 to author workflow. However, you certainly can use 2010 against the Office 2007 suite, and there is a nice upgrade path there as well to use 2010 with Office 2007 today, and then when Office 2010 rolls out, to expect a seamless transition as far as SharePoint is concerned, where really you pick up a few new capabilities, but otherwise it's business as usual.
Thank you. Another question we had was, what are the new features of SharePoint 2010 comparing to 2007? Quick points would be helpful. How SharePoint 2010 saves cost to enterprise like felonies? Is that right?
So I'm not familiar with the enterprise in particular, but if we want to look at 2010 versus 2007 from a cost saving standpoint, there's a number of core features to highlight. One is that SharePoint 2010 has actually implemented, SharePoint 2007 was really weak in the governance area. It was a great tool in many respects, but governance was something that was really overlooked as a product. 2010 has filled that gap. There's a much stronger wealth of tools that allow administrators to essentially keep tabs on a farm and keep it up and running and keep the lights on with a whole lot less involvement and a whole lot less hassle. The second key piece there is the shared service providers have been obsolesced and replaced by a new services model that is fundamentally easier to configure and easier to administer and is less prone to encountering problems during its life, which again reduces the long-term and maintenance costs associated. Another key piece there is around some of the better delegation of power features where site owners and site collection administrators have been given a stronger toolbox of features, including their own scope of solutions that they can deploy that, again, reduce the IT overhead and the administration overhead. And again, this ties into the governance piece with very tight controls to essentially deliver this power without delivering additional risk to the stability of the platform. So these are some of the key ones I'd highlight if you're looking at a 2000 to 2010 move and where the cost savings would be. I think a lot of those would be around being able to have IT administrators and developers spend less time keeping the platform running and finely tuned.
Thank you. Another question was, can I use SharePoint 2010 Designer with Moss?
You cannot, unfortunately. So Designer 2007 with Moss, Designer 2010 with SharePoint 2010.
Okay, thank you. One other question was, are you familiar with SharePoint 2010 and if it will have any mapping capabilities?
It depends what you mean by mapping. So when we're talking mapping, I'm going to assume we're talking about GIS kind of applications, the abilities to do geographical data and tagging. And to that end, I don't believe that's part of the out-of-the-box feature set. That is certainly something to look at, and a good question. I'm sure that there are solutions out there to integrate with it. However, I don't think that mapping from a GIS standpoint is part of the out-of-the-box toolkit.
Thanks, William. And I had someone ask if we are sending the presentation, and we will be sending it. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions, and we'd greatly appreciate your feedback.
Actually, before we get there, I'm going to add one more point to that mapping question, because I should have mentioned that one of those offerings actually is MapPoint 2010 that can be integrated with SharePoint 2010 to a limited degree to support some of the GIS features.
Oh, thank you. All right. So first question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? Give another second. Great, thank you. Second question, please rate the presentation content. Excellent, good, or poor? Give it another second. All right, thank you. Last question, would you like us to schedule a follow-up? Yes or no? Uh-oh, seems that it was closed for a moment. I'm sorry, everyone. Give it a few more seconds. Great, thank you. We'd like to apologize again for all of our technical difficulties, and we'd also like to thank William again for this wonderful presentation. This webcast is a part of our SharePoint series, and the next webcast, Social and Digital Marketing in SharePoint 2010, will take place on November 3rd. We'll be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available, along with more information on the November 3rd webcast. If you have any further questions about this presentation, please feel free to email William. I think he's trying to get to the slide with his email address. Let's see.
Actually, I'm not navigating at the moment, but let me go ahead and do. It seems to have a mind of its own, or some its own controls. There it is.
There you go. There's the email.
Ah.
Nope. Again, thank you everyone for being so patient with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. You are now free to disconnect. Thank you.